Exiles, what's up with the Path of Exile community here at the end of 2024? The year is 2011. World of Warcraft isn't even a decade old yet. The world is set to end in about a year due to a global apocalypse predicted by the Mayans. I'm not even in high school yet, and just started dating the girl who would become my wonderful wife. And on August 10th, 2011, Path of Exile releases into a closed beta, and people are absolutely loving it. Despite the game obviously being massively janky with tremendous bugs, ridiculous animations and graphics, and questionable balance, the bones are there. One day, this game is going to be absolutely titanic. An ARPG to rival the best currently out there, and perhaps eventually surpass them in terms of quality, cadence, and even graphical fidelity. It took quite some time for Path of Exile to find its footing. Essentially, between the start of closed beta in August 2011 and the launch of its 3.0 expansion, The Fall of Oriath, everything surrounding Path of Exile was sporadic and experimental. The amount of time a league lasted was variable. One might last a month, another 3, and another 6 months, maybe another a few weeks. The sizes of expansions were also unpredictable. One might add a ridiculous amount of content to the game, while the next 2 might be tiny. In the background, they were always working on a massive expansion to the game, but how long that took was unpredictable, and people liked predictability. This was a dark age for Path of Exile players. The game was obviously stellar, but its development was a tad erratic, perhaps even too dynamic. However, many understood this was a new company finding its footing with their very first game. They knew in good time a golden age would hit, and they'd be able to say, "I knew it! This game has always been good! I was there in the dark ages helping it grow, and now I'm here, in its prime, in its golden age, and damn, does that feel good." You might know what I'm cooking at this point. It gets better. Part of the point here is, after 3.0, people's expectations were set appropriately by grinding your games, and players absolutely adored that. They adored it because their expectations were being set and met. This combination was vital. New leagues started every 3 months. They had a very strict set of content, and if you didn't enjoy that content, you could always hop in 3 months later for something totally new. This perfect 3-month stretch lasted for this set of Path of Exile leagues. Let's analyze this phenomena, pulling up the receipts of every one of these leagues post Fall of Oriath. It's a pretty big set. It all started with 3.1 War for the Atlas to 3.2 Bestiary, the update in which Uber Elder was added alongside Einhar. Then it continued from 3.2 to 3.3 Incursion League, which introduced us to Elva and the Temple of Atzoatl, a fan favorite character and place and present day league mechanic. It kept going with 3.3 to 3.4 Delve League, which brought the entirety of delve and fossil crafting. A certain digger named Steve is eternally grateful for this patch. It continued with 3.4 to 3.5 Betrayal League, which revamped Masters entirely and brought in Katarina as a boss, alongside veiled items and crafting. Then it went on from 3.5 to 3.6 Synthesis League, which was rich with story, but uber broken on start and required lots of fixes. This league is looked upon fondly, but at the time, most people seemed to despise it. The chain continued with 3.6 to 3.7 Legion League, which had Cyclone as the most busted skill imaginable. Can you believe it? On it went with 3.7 to 3.8 Blight League, which added tower defense to the game, and as I always like to say, this was the time I started playing Path of Exile 1. The streak carried on strong with 3.8 to 3.9 Conquerors of the Atlas, which brought an entirely new addition to Endgame alongside the Metamorph League, a mechanic that is no longer in present-day Path of Exile. Right before this came out, the first Exile Con occurred, and Path of Exile 2's existence was revealed on November 15th, 2019. This was supposed to be the legendary 4.0 patch. The 3-month cycle carried on through a worldwide issue with 3.9 to 3.10 Delirium, which allowed us to juice to levels never thought possible, and had probably the most broken build of the league ever, Herald Stackers. It kept going strong with 3.10 to 3.11 Harvest League with the most busted crafting of all time at that point in the game's life. The ease of crafting was just insane. So easy I could craft mirror tier gear, which is quite the feat. On the streak went in 3.11 to 3.12 Heist League, which also required a ton of fixes at the outset, but had excellent lore. This is where the opening doors meme became prevalent in the community and still pops up from time to time today. Finally, after the 11 consecutive leagues, the 3-month cycle slipped from 3.12 Heist to 3.13 Echoes of the Atlas to 4 months for the first time since 3.0 to 3.1. 3.13 was an Atlas expansion and brought the Maven and her Crucible encounters alongside Ritual League, so people were fine with it. Many people actually view 3.13 as the best PoE league of all time, even today after a set of banger leagues thereafter. Right after Echoes of the Atlas, the 3-month cycle started up again. It began with 3.13 to 3.14 Ultimatum League, which had the first big launch day server issue with streamer queues, as some might claim, but it was a relatively enjoyable league with the Trial Master and the Ultimatum League mechanic. Then we moved from 3.14 to 3.15 Expedition League, which had a large number of nerfs to player power and changes that pissed people off massively, despite a large amount of content in the actual league mechanic. I think right here is about the time when Grinding Gear Games decided Path of Exile 2 would be a separate game from Path of Exile 1. They said it was very close to the Ultimatum reveal. This is the league right after that. I wonder if they realized they needed to rein in player power for Path of Exile 1 because it was getting out of control. Then the streak continued with 3.15 to 3.16 Scourge League, which was a small content league that looked beautiful, especially monster model-wise. Then another slip occurred from 3.16 to 3.17. 3.17 was yet another and quite possibly the final Atlas expansion, Siege of the Atlas, bringing Eldritch crafting and 4 new pinnacle bosses to the game alongside the Arch Nemesis league mechanic. The 3-month cycle briefly ramped up again right after. It kickstarted with 3.17 to 3.18 Sentinel League, which brought all the Uber bosses into Path of Exile alongside Recombination, which people loved. Thereafter, we moved from 3.18 to 3.19 Lake of Calandra League, which was the most divisive and controversial Path of Exile league of all time, easily. Amidst Arch Nemesis modded monsters, loot goblin hunting, a bit of a broken league mechanic, and people attacking Grinding Gear Games for how they were communicating with the community, this was definitely a dark age. This is also when I began making content for Path of Exile to try and fight against the very, very, very dark and sour community. The league after Calandra had a delayed launch. The wait from 3.19 Calandra to 3.20 The Forbidden Sanctum was August 19th, 2022 to December 9th, 2022. Calandra ended up being another 4-month league. This same happened again with 3.20 Sanctum to 3.21 Crucible. The wait was December 9th, 2022 to April 7th, 2023, about 4 months. Many people didn't mind this one as much either, especially given the terrible reception to Lake of Calandra and the amazing reception to Sanctum, which remains to this day the best league in terms of player retention. But then, the same delay happened again with 3.21 to 3.22 Trial of the Ancestors, during which the split between Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 was announced at ExileCon 2023. The death of the 3-month cycle continued until we finally land in the present, wherein Path of Exile 1 is only receiving 2 expansions in the year 2024, and Path of Exile 2's early access has been delayed from June 7th, 2024 to November 15th, 2024, and now to December 6th, 2024 at the time of recording this video. Additionally, it appears we'll be having the first 6 months or so league since 2.6 Legacy League, with the swap from 3.25 Settlers of Kalgur to 3.26 Mystery League starting in early 2025, anywhere from late January to sometime in March. Looking back briefly, Sentinel to Calandra was the last 3-month league cycle we experienced. How interesting. So, are we in the darkest age in Path of Exile history right now? Are we even in a dark age at all? Some say this is indeed the worst timeline for Path of Exile. Let's take a look at 3 sides, then the truth, and then I'll give my personal take before wrapping it all into a ribbon that would impress Lady Diala herself. But before we get into that, if you end up liking this video, or if you're liking it now, make sure to hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more Path of Exile and Beyond content just like this, you hit the subscribe button as well, alongside the sub notification bell. I appreciate all the support. Now let's get into the meat of the video. Let's start with the rightly upset Exiles, people who don't feel great about the state of Path of Exile and are communicating that feeling with fairness. This group understands exactly what Grinding Gear Games is doing, placing importance on the launch of Path of Exile 2 and forgoing Path of Exile 1 goodwill in the process. They don't like this. They are Path of Exile 1 fans first and would like to play that game. They're disappointed with this layout of Grinding Gear Games' plans and are communicating this respectfully. That's a good way to approach this dilemma. Some of them do see this as a dark age for the game, especially as some see the future of Path of Exile 1 being uncertain with Path of Exile 2 around the corner, especially if they're not interested in playing an early access game. They might want to wait until Path of Exile 2 is fully out and ready and free before they hop on in. This Exile right here exhibits this group perfectly. I am pretty bummed out about the delay of 3.26. For me and many others, Christmas, New Year is the time when we have a bunch of free time on our hands. A lot of people even have obligatory holidays during that time. Needless to say, the 3.26 delay stings a lot for a game I am not that interested in until it actually fully releases in a year or two. I'm not here to incite hate or anything. I just want to voice my disappointment, especially since I thought they had different teams working on PoE 1 and PoE 2 respectively, and they said PoE 2 won't impact PoE 1. Yet the game is not even out and already delaying leagues. December and January, but especially December, is a time when a lot of people love to play Path of Exile 1. They have more time off, some have fewer responsibilities, and they enjoyed almost always being able to tune into a brand new PoE 1 expansion. For the first time in a while, this will not happen and they'll be unable to enjoy their favorite game during this time of year. This Exile also has the perception that PoE 1 and PoE 2 have separate teams working on them. Although scattered throughout interviews and streams and posts and the like, Grinding Gear Games has not explicitly stated the number of people working on Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2, or that either team has dedicated members in any official capacity. I know for a fact many developers work on both games and shift between teams when needed. Perhaps when PoE 2 releases, the teams will become more solidified, but for now, the workers go where needed, when needed. And right now, and in the immediate future, Path of Exile 2 is where help is needed. I'd also classify many Path of Exile 1 content creators in this category of fair-minded people. These individuals rely on Path of Exile primarily to live and thrive. When times are uncertain, they are deeply affected professionally and personally. Mathil is an excellent example. Here are his thoughts. Kinda devastating that no new league until probably Feb, but starting Settlers again with that bonus map shit is kinda tempting, not gonna lie. Still, rent's due, and we're looking at like a 6th month Path of Exile league. Or Lighty's reaction. Still sticking with PoE 2, not impacting PoE 1? Or Zizzarin's. People thought I was crazy for new league in Feb. This is pretty much exactly what I had in mind, so I'm not shocked. Let's hope it's worth the wait and knuckle down. Rough year for streamers. Looking forward to once PoE 2 is done and PoE 1 gets some love again. Everyone here is right on one thing. It is incredibly unfortunate that Path of Exile 1's content cadence has been deeply affected by Path of Exile 2's development, especially because Grinding Gear Games was on such a roll. Now let's hop to the opposite end of the spectrum with the ridiculously upset Exiles, folks who are enraged at what's going on with Path of Exile and are flaming people on all sides. There's not much to elaborate on here, and all examples of this have been deleted from community discussion places. This group is just pissed at Grinding Gear Games for focusing too much on Path of Exile 2 and fervently believe it will lead to the death of Path of Exile 1. It will destroy the PoE 1 community, the game, and only leave PoE 2 remaining. While most of these people are too much, they bring up one good point I'd like to explore: the changing of community. What is going to happen once Path of Exile 2 comes out? Will this split the Path of Exile 1 and 2 communities? Will PoE 2 players be welcome in PoE 1 spaces, and PoE 1 players be welcome in PoE 2 spaces? Or will many players from either side despise the players of the other side? I'm really hoping this type of polarization does not occur, but I can imagine a world in which there's a banger Path of Exile 1 league and a lackluster Path of Exile 2 league, which leads to outrage, absolute apocalyptic doom posting. The opposite could happen too. It's going to be a tricky thing to juggle. I suppose the best case study is old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3, but I am not too well versed on that subject. Perhaps I could speak to someone who is soon. Finally, let's move to the hyped out the Wazoo Exiles, players who are genuinely excited about the future of both games, but mostly Path of Exile 2, and think these delays and restructures were the best thing to do for Path of Exile, and they're just amazing. They just want Path of Exile 2. They don't care much about Path of Exile 1 at this point and have a PoE 2 centered mindset. In their eyes, the best thing for grinding your games to do would be to focus entirely on Path of Exile 2. They have either never played PoE 1 and lurk in discussions about it, tried PoE 1 and were burned, or are just done with PoE 1 at this point and ready to play a new title. Succinctly, Path of Exile 1 is cooked, and grinding your games needs to cook as long as possible with Path of Exile 2. Some of you might think this is my opinion, but it's not. Don't worry, we'll get to my opinion after we talk about some cold, hard facts. So, now what's the truth of it all? This isn't yet my personal take, as I just said. This is what I state as objective reality on the situation, gathering all the facts and reactions from players, devs, and other stakeholders in the state of Path of Exile 1 and 2. It's super simple. This obviously sucks, and is a consequence of hurdles grinding your games has faced with Path of Exile 2, many of them unexpected. The larger the scope of Path of Exile 2 has become, the more development effort it has needed, especially as we've grown closer to launch times. As the day of release approaches, with huge tasks still remaining, it's all hands on deck for people to work on the product that has received massive amounts of exposure, investment, and effort from grinding your games. Path of Exile is standing. It works. It is launched. It has an audience. It has a set of expectations and goodwill built up within the community. Grinding your games can take more risks with Path of Exile 1's development cycle than they can with Path of Exile 2's launch. They've already delayed Path of Exile 2's early access multiple times. They don't want to do it again, so they're putting maximum effort in it right now. Then, if and when it does release, they need all hands on deck focusing on Path of Exile 2 fires. That will happen. Quite dissimilar to Path of Exile 1's closed beta launch in August 2011, grinding your games has one titanic opportunity to get Path of Exile 2's launch right, even though it's early access, with the tremendous marketing and hype done for this moment. From in-person events and ad spots during major game shows, the launch is going to boast hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million people. That is not where Path of Exile 1 was at on launch. They need to make sure the first impressions people have of Path of Exile 2 are extremely positive. Path of Exile 2 isn't going to have a decade to set people's expectations right. They need to do it from the get-go, even in early access. They're working hard over there. They are probably exhausted, but they're doing their best to deliver strongly on Path of Exile 2 promises while also maintaining Path of Exile 1 as best they can muster. Additionally, I'm not too sure why people are very focused on the idea that Path of Exile 2 development would not affect Path of Exile 1. That's never really been true. Many times, the devs have discussed how it is currently impacting PoE 1, but wouldn't once the game was released. More on that in a bit. Beyond that, what's the truth? We have no real idea. We know they want to develop both games, but how long will it take for Path of Exile 2 to enter 1.0 or an official launch? We don't know. We know they want to run staggered leagues between the games. When will that start? We have no clue. There's a lot of factual uncertainty, and many people claiming to know the absolute truth are being misleading. The only people who know the ins and outs of this are grinding your games, and even then, it's likely select people there presently. And even then again, it's probably changing by the week. Neversink, the creator of everyone's favorite loot filter, Filterblade, had the best take on the truth, I'd say. I sympathize with the developers. They're in a rough spot. Releasing Path of Exile 1 earlier would not work anymore, due to collision of testing, interest, hype with Path of Exile 2. On top of that, everyone is likely completely overworked there and crunching hard. I get the delay. Upset to hear it. That said, releasing a new game messes with schedule. Understandable. I hope that after PoE 2, both games will go on a steady 3 leagues a year cycle. Everything faster than that will likely lead to me neglecting one of the two. Anything more, too little, low. I think his take is respectable in both posts, but it's not my own. Finally, let's discuss my personal take. The state of Path of Exile's schedule sucks presently, but this is all for the long-term benefit of both Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2. Let me explain with a dumb metaphor. Let's say you have a garden. It starts out as nothing, but grows into something incredible after years, maybe 10 or 11 years of effort. Then you have this amazing idea about another garden, but you don't want to plant these new vegetables and fruits into your current garden, so you begin constructing an ambitious new garden. It grows into something much larger than your first garden, and while developing it, you don't have as much time for your old garden. So while you do maintain it, it's not flourishing as it was before. You know that as soon as you finish out this new garden, get all the plants lively and thriving, that it will be far easier to sustain both it and your old garden. After creating the structure, laying down the foundation, choosing which plants you'd like, feeding those plants until they are stable and viable, and then curating your final garden plan is a ton more work than simply watering it, weeding it, and adding some new plants to it every so often. Your old garden suffers and doesn't produce as much fruit, veggies, and excitement during the building phase for your new garden. But with proper care, once you finish the new garden, it shall flourish once more. Once Path of Exile 2 is up and running, all its foundations set and plants determined, it will be far easier for grinding your games to maintain and update both games. They need time to do it, time to get it right, and we should give it to them, even if it's very unfortunate in the short term. You can choose not to support them in this endeavor. Vote with your wallet. Don't buy the wicked supporter packs that are incoming. Or you can respectfully outline why you are upset with the direction they're taking here, obviously focusing on Path of Exile 2 until it launches fully into 1.0 and putting less resources, both regular and emergency, on Path of Exile 1. Either of those approaches work, but don't doom. Grinding your games are not sunsetting Path of Exile 1. They've stated as much many times over. They are putting the focus into their $100+ million project and getting it off the ground. I support them in that personally, professionally, and financially, even if I understand why many Path of Exile players are disappointed. I'm positive about the future of both games, even if at the moment, I am far more excited about what's about to hit with Path of Exile 2, hopefully on December 6th, 2024. Weaving all this together, in no way are we in the darkest timeline for Path of Exile players. We exist in a day and age where we're not only playing one possible Path of Exile, but two. The developer of both games, Grinding Gear Games, has faced multiple mountains of challenges in their player-centric pursuit of keeping up on updates for Path of Exile 1, while developing and maintaining consumer-focused promises for Path of Exile 2. The Dark Ages for Path of Exile existed in a time where the best ARPGs to play were Diablo 2, Titan Quest, Torchlight, and other similar titles. But they weren't getting any consistent support or updates. They were one-and-dones. The Dark Ages for Path of Exile were when PoE expansions were sporadic, and the future of Path of Exile was uncertain. During a time when leagues like Talisman popped up, then a banger like Ascendancy appears, and the time till the next banger league was uncertain. The Dark Ages were during the Lake of Kalandra League, when the community and development team clashed and the developers basically went silent on community communication for 2 whole years. If anything, we are not in a dark age of Path of Exile. We're on the cusp of the brightest age yet, a golden period wherein everything is new with Path of Exile 2, and we all feel like children experiencing our favorite hobby for the first time once more. And then, alongside all the brand new Path of Exile 2 content, once that garden is fully constructed, we'll also be getting love in our old garden too, with new leagues and expansions for Path of Exile 1. Truly, Exiles, a golden age is nearly here. I can feel it. Can you? Seriously, thanks for watching this video, Exile. It was a tremendous effort putting it together. If you'd like to see future ones just like it, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and ring the sub notification bell. Shout out to all the patron and member Exiles too. If you'd like to join either, you can for $1 a month. If you're eager for some more Path of Exile video essays, watch this one on screen right now about Path of Exile's most famous and infamous players. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Exile.